came to this company, I knew a little bit about irrigation, mostly from my studies. My master's degree and my PhD both were focused on actually weed research and parasitic weeds, and mostly physiological studies. So, yeah, this is very... נכון? שמות? זה לא יותר מדי? Okay. Okay. And I also, in my postdoc, I was dealing a little bit with remote sensing, but mostly using drones. So when I came to MANA, it was mostly the first time that I got into the subject of irrigation. And I found a really interesting world there, and very, of course, crucial to any crop cultivation. So as you can see, the company is actually, we have users, the product of this company is an application, a mobile and a desktop application, and we have users all over the world, including a lot in India, in many crops. Of course not in greenhouses and such, because our application uses remote sensing and satellite, meaning it has to be an open field or an open orchard. But we do have in cotton, of course, and a lot of orchards, grapes, and potatoes and tomatoes, and what else? Pomegranates and others. Okay, and we are a daughter company of Riviolis, an irrigation company in drip, the second largest drip irrigation company. Right now, we are really in the middle of a merger with Jane Irrigation. Maybe you know about it, but yeah, this is a very big step for us. So, let's jump in. What is the challenge I'm going to talk about that irrigation scheduling is trying to solve? So it is to find the optimal irrigation scheduling for best water use efficiency. What is water use efficiency? It's actually being able to produce the highest yield with the least use of water. And this is very challenging. Okay, so of course you know that under irrigation can cause plant stress. They will not develop properly. Of course, it will harm production and yield, won't be optimal. But also over irrigation might cause roots to rot and nutrient leaching, of course, and many times it can also, when it comes in the wrong stage of development, it can cause a vegetative development instead of productive development. And of course, not to say about energy costs of using a lot of water. So the goal that we are talking about in irrigation scheduling, and what also my company is trying to do, is find the optimal irrigation. So we can find the optimal time to apply the irrigation and in the right amount. Okay, so what are actually the common practice? So I will tell you that in most of the world, still the common irrigation practice is according to tradition. How my father used to irrigate, what my family is doing, what my neighbors are doing. Like if my neighbor is irrigating today, maybe I should irrigate as well, something like that. A lot of intuition, which is important, of course, being in the field, feeling the soil, feeling wetness, feeling, of course, the environment, how hot it is and such, and using those qualities. It is very important, but of course it is not scientific. And it requires a lot of experience to be in development, and there's always room for optimization of that method. And this is exactly what we are trying to do in Mana's product, we are not trying to replace the farmer. We are trying to help him make a more smart and intelligent decision that is based on real measurement and data. Okay. So the decision of when and how much water to apply to a given field, it is the irrigation scheduling, what we call. To replenish the soil with water to the optimal or desired level of soil moisture using specific indications. And of course, the benefits are to maximize the irrigation efficiency, as we said, the yield per cubic meter, to save water and energy, and also to reduce fertilizers waste because we are reducing runoff and leaching or deep percolation. Okay. Okay, let's do it like this. Okay, so I'm going to focus on two main methods that are being used for irrigation scheduling. One is using soil sensors, and mostly soil sensors. There are other methods, but actually based on measuring the soil water content. So we know, according to characteristics of the soil and the root zone depth, we can know what is expected in the root zone layer, how much water this soil can hold. And when we use soil sensors, we are actually measuring the soil water content, okay? Another approach would be to calculate how much humidity is in the soil, and that is done mostly according to soil water balance, which I will elaborate on each of those. Okay, so, oh, sorry, I forgot to. Okay, so you can see in the images in here at the bottom an example of soil sensors that are located in the field. Usually they are being installed in more than one depth, but it has to be a depth that is relevant, of course, for the crop, for the root zone layer. And the other approach would be to calculate, according to all inputs and outputs of water out of the field, what is today's soil water content using a soil water balance, and I will tell you more about it. It is based on the approach written in a document that was published by FAO, by the Food and Agriculture Organization, called FAO 56. I don't know which one of you is practicing irrigation and irrigation scheduling. Maybe you can tell me. But if you do, you probably know this document, right? Some of you know this document, FAO 56? No. Okay. Okay. Then this is my presentation. We'll talk about it. Okay, so what we see in this graph are two series, okay? So let's start with the bottom one. So the bottom one is soil moisture that was measured by soil sensor. In this case, it's a volumetric soil sensor. And you can see in the bars the wetting events that were actually happening in the field. So as we can see, whenever there was a wetting event, it can be an irrigation event, it can be a rain event, then we see that the soil water content is rising. Afterwards, the plants, of course, are using this water, so it is decreasing until the next event. The red dotted line here is marked as a threshold in this specific case to indicate the onset of stress, meaning that in this point, the plants will not have readily available water for their use, and therefore they will need to invest a lot of energy in order to pull water out of the soil. This energy has costs, and of course it will cost in production. So we do not want to reach this phase of stress in plants when they invest energy. In most cases, I say, I will say that, of course, there are some crops and some situations where stress is desirable. When we want to actually inflict stress in plants because it will cause some sort of effect on the yield or the usually it would be like not in quantity but in quality, as we do, for instance, in wine. Okay, in wine, a lot of times in vineyards, you inflict stress because you want certain characteristics of the grapes to have more sugars or something else, less water or something else, so in order to have specific qualities for your wine. But this is a specific case. In a lot of production situations, of course, the crop is non-stress, is growing non-stress. So we do not want to reach these phases of stress. Okay, now let's see the upper graph. So the upper graph is actually soil water content, as in the bottom one, but this is calculated, meaning it is not based on measurement at all. It is based on calculating a daily soil water balance. We take into account all inputs of water, and we will talk a little bit more about it later, and all outputs of water. And we see what is the situation. So you can see that the trends look a little bit similar, of course. There might be some differences. Some differences can occur, of course, in calculations. In general, it can be different than measured. But also, we need to remember that measurements occur in a specific place in the field. Sensor is placed in one area of the field in a specific location. So this location also it might not be representative for the entire field. So when using soil sensors, it is also important to choose the best area of installation. Of course, you need to find the most representative part of the field where you install the soil sensor in order to give you an indication for the entire field. Okay? So this is important. And in calculations, of course, there are many times some assumptions you make that might have a different view of what you see as at the end of calculation. But of course, as you can see, the trends are very similar. When there is a wetting event, the soil water content is rising, and then the plants are using this water, and it is decreasing. And also, when you're calculating soil water content, you need to know a little bit about the field that you are talking about. You need to know the soil type in order to know what are the characteristics of the soil and how much water holding capacity this soil have. A light soil will have a low water holding capacity, while heavy soil can hold more water, meaning the total available water that is available in a heavy soil will be higher in amount than in a sandy soil, for instance. And also, you need to know how deep are the roots, because you need to know what is the layer of the soil. And if you think of it, it is like a pool of water, that you need to know how much water a specific area in your field can hold. Okay, so if you know that at a specific stage of growth your roots are 30 centimeters deep, then this would be the layer that you're talking about. And if it's a heavy soil, it will hold, for instance, it can hold, for instance, 100 millimeters. But if it is a sandy soil, it can hold maybe only 50 millimeters. Okay, this is the water holding capacity. Okay, so we move forward. Okay, so I have a few slides on soil sensors. I will say this is not my main area of expertise. Mostly we are using remote sensing, and we are calculating soil water balance. But when you do have a soil sensor in the field, it is very important to understand what you see. Does anyone have any experience with soil sensors? No. Okay. Okay. So maybe it will be even more interesting for you. Okay, so what we see here is an actual graph of soil sensors that measure volumetric water content. So we see here a straight line. It's measuring in two depths, okay, 20 centimeters deep and 40 centimeters deep. So it is measuring, and then on this day, there was an irrigation event. So what we see that both sensors had an instant increase because there was an irrigation applied, then you see an increase. Okay, we do see here, do you see the dates and hours? So each one is like, it's 12 hours. Okay, it's in 12 hours jumps. So during the first half day, you see saturation, okay, in both sensors, in both depths. You see this line. This is because this soil has high clay content and the infiltration rate is low. Then the soil stays for half a day, for 12 hours, it stayed saturated. Then we do see a decrease that is starting. So this decrease happening, it's starting in the middle of the day. So we know that part of it will be drainage, but because it's during the day, we do see that most of it will be use of water by the plants. So this is how much water the plants have used in this day. After that, there is a night, and this is night drainage because, of course, during the night, there is no photosynthesis, there is no transpiration, so the plants do not take water out of the soil into the atmosphere, so most of the decrease will be drainage. And then the next day there is a use and drainage and use and drainage, okay? We do see that at some point there is almost no drainage. And why would it be? Because at this time there are almost no available water to drain at this layer. Or it can also happen because the soil is in filled capacity, and also the bottom layers would also be full in filled capacity, meaning there is no drainage from that layer downwards. Okay, we also see the same phenomena in the other layer. Now, if we look at the trends, okay, so we see the first day, the water uptake was this one, then it changed, then it is changing for each day, the uptake of water. So there is a trend. And at some point, we do see that the trend is really changing drastically, okay? If we ignore, of course, the first day, that is the highest day, but at some point, there is a shift in trend. And this shift in trend can imply to us what we will see in the next slide when we are talking about identifying the stress. Okay, so to identify the point in stress is a very important tool in order to determine when is the optimal time for the next irrigation. We do want to apply it, of course, as we mentioned before we inflict stress on the plants. Okay, so what we see here, we see the use of water for each day, and then at some point we do see like a very big change in trend. This change in trend is indicating the onset of stress, okay? At this particular example, there was no other irrigation that was applied, meaning at this point, we are reaching wilting. But of course, you need to remember there are two layers here. So the sensor is measuring at this specific layer, but it also measuring below that. So it might be that roots at this layer are in wilting because they do not have enough water. But it doesn't mean that the plants will be entirely in wilting, because plants can have, of course, a much more extensive root system that will penetrate more deeper layers. But this is very important, especially in the beginning of the crop, of the development of the crop, when the crop is young, and the roots are concentrated, the active roots are concentrated on the upper layers of the soil. Then it will be, of course, more meaningful not to reach this part, because then it will definitely have an effect on the ability of the plants to take water, because the roots are damaged. Okay. So if I want to just summarize a little bit about the soil sensors part. So of course, as we've seen, and you are welcome to ask me more questions about it later if you are interested to know more about it. Then the soil water content estimated by soil sensor can indicate of the best timing for irrigation. But as I mentioned before, so it is not always distinct to understand the required amount. Okay, the amount is a little bit tricky. It can be learned from experience. If you apply a specific amount of irrigation and you see that this reaches field capacity, it can help you understand what is the amount that fills the soil layer to a total available water, and then you know this is the depth of your pool. But not always the interpretation of these graphs can help you understand what is actual amount that is best or optimal for irrigation. Another, as I mentioned before, soil sensors are giving us an image of a specific location and not always representative for the entire area of the field. And as probably you know, soil sensors might be very costly. They are logistically challenging, and other logistical constraints dealing with soil sensors, like wrong installation or theft or whatever, or damage by animals, many things. So I do think that there is a lot to learn by using soil sensors, and I do believe that in some crops, especially when it is a valuable crop or that the return is very high, then using soil sensors can really be useful. But in more extensive growth, I think it can be supportive. I wouldn't use soil sensors as the main data for us to rely upon when we are planning irrigation scheduling. But a combination is always better. Okay, so I want to talk about calculating soil water balance. And so this diagram actually is based on the publication described in FAO 56. And what we do in order to calculate a daily soil water balance, we started some starting point. Okay, it can be, usually it will be like a meaningful irrigation event that really brought the entire root zone depth to field capacity. This would be our starting point. It can also be like a good rain event that really filled up the soil with water to field capacity. Okay, and starting from this point, we can calculate a daily water balance. So we know that we have no depletion of water when we are in field capacity, and then we take all the inputs of water into the field. So mostly we would focus on irrigation and precipitation and rainfalls, and this is important to record the amount that you are that fell in rainfalls or the amount that was irrigated, it is important to record it in order to have the correct calculations. Another input of water that we have in some cases is capillary rise, where water are rising from the below root zone depth from groundwater usually upwards. So this is, it can be common in some fields. It can happen in some fields. Sometimes it happens near rivers, for instance. It is very hard to take this parameter into your calculations. It is very hard to account for that. Sometimes the growers would not even know it is happening. Sometimes it is not uniform across all field. It can be like only in specific parts of the field. And also, of course, to understand what is the amount that is rising is very challenging. I guess perhaps using soil sensors would help understand about this parameter, about capillary rise, if you have it or you don't. But as I said before, it gives you a specific location. So it does not mean this parameter has an effect in the entire area of the field. So usually we ignore this parameter. No other solution. But if a grower knows he has it, then needs to think of how to account for this amount of water. And so these are the inputs, or two major inputs of water, and there are outputs of water. So one would be, of course, deep percolation of water leaching below the root zone depth. In cases of saturation or high saturation of water, there will also be runoff of water. This is also a parameter that is very tricky to take into account because you need to know slopes and where the water are running to. But mostly it means that in this specific area, the water are not staying in the root zone depth. They are moving somewhere else. So this is another parameter. And of course, the main parameter that I want to talk about mostly is ETC, or evapotranspiration of the crop. Of course, this is the most important parameter to be calculating or to even measuring, okay? It is not very easy to measure evapotranspiration of the crop. You need very sophisticated equipment for that. It is done mostly in universities and in research centers using flux towers, or it is also called eddy covariance towers. It is very sophisticated sensors that actually measure flux of water out and in of the field. They are located above the field. So measuring evapotranspiration of the crop is very challenging, and usually what we do is calculate it. And I want to show you now one method to calculate evapotranspiration of the crop, which is described in FAO 56, in the document I told you about. And tomorrow in my lecture, I will tell you how we are calculating in MANA the evapotranspiration of the crop using remote sensing. We are not the only company that does that. There are other companies that does exactly that. But calculating or understanding how much water the plants or the area of the field has lost from soil to atmosphere can give a very good indication on how much water we need to irrigate in return, because these are the water that were lost. So this is what we need to return to the soil in order to reach field capacity again. It is that simple. Okay. So, what is evapotranspiration? Evapotranspiration is actually two processes. It is combination of two processes. One is transpiration. So the transpiration is the process where water are being evaporated from the leaves, from the vegetative areas of the plants into the atmosphere. And evaporation is the process of water being evaporated from the soil into the atmosphere. of course, it is from the top soil layers. So we can see a demonstration here of the transpiration process, for instance. Water are being absorbed by the roots. They are being transported through the stem and up into the leaves. Okay. Something smells burning here, so okay. But as long as it's not me, then I'm fine. No, I'm a little bit nervous. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so let's continue. So water are being absorbed by the roots, transported through the plant, and through stomatas in the leaves. The water are being evaporated into the atmosphere. Okay? Another process, a physical process, is where the water are evaporated from the topsoil layers. And as we see in here, if we look at like a general scheme of season in field crops, it would be, of course, very different when we are talking about orchards, and especially in evergreens that have vegetative tissue all through season. But if we talk about field crops, it is very easy to understand. At the beginning of the season, near planting, most area of the field is bare, and therefore most of the evapotranspiration is accounted on the soil evaporation. And the crop transpiration is very low at this part because the plants are very small. And as the season progresses, of course, the crop transpiration is becoming the major process. Also, when the crop grows and it reaches full cover, then it shades the soil, and usually there is almost no evaporation from the soil in that time. Okay, so as we said, the crop evapotranspiration depends on the vegetative level, meaning the leaf of area or the crop cover, and of course meteorological conditions. If it's very dry, then the force of the atmosphere to pull the water from the plants will be much stronger. Also, if it's very hot, so it is a combination. Okay. And okay. So according to FAO, the FAO approach, or the paradigm that FAO are talking about, in order to calculate the crop evapotranspiration, we are taking ETO, which is the evapotranspiration or reference evapotranspiration, and then we correct it according to a crop coefficient. And I will tell you a little bit more about it. How am I on time?
You can wrap it up in the next
5
5 minutes.
minutes. Okay, so let me hurry it up. Okay, so ETO, the reference ET is the evapotranspiration of a reference crop. Usually it's grass, sometimes it's alfalfa. And instead of measuring, as we mentioned, we cannot measure what is happening in every given moment in a specific field. So what we do is we have a method to measure, and in our days it is to calculate the reference evapotranspiration, or ETO, according to the meteorological conditions. So we know that today, according to the meteorological conditions, if we had grass cover in this area, it would lose 6 millimeters. Okay, this is how much water it would evapotranspirate, 6 millimeters. So we take this parameter, and then we multiply it by the crop coefficient, Kc. So what is the Kc? It is the coefficient that allows us to correct the reference evapotranspiration according to our specific crop and according to the stage that the crop is in, because at each stage it will have a different value. If it is small, then we need to reduce the crop coefficient. If it's high and it has a lot of vegetative tissue, then the crop coefficient will be higher. Okay, and this is how we do it. So, the crop coefficient, where it is taken from, it can be estimated. I know growers that actually go outside and they measure the area of shade below their plants, and so they know to estimate according to that what is the crop coefficient. This is one method. Another would be to use a protocol. For instance, in the document I mentioned, there are protocols general for almost any crop. Okay, so for each period of the season, but they are very general. But many countries in their maybe extension offices would have specific location protocols. Okay, so we know that in Nagpur, for instance, in cotton growth, the protocol would be to irrigate for 2 weeks in a crop coefficient of 0.3, and then it increases for, I don't know, for 5 weeks, and then another 5 weeks it will be using a crop coefficient of 1 maybe, and then it will decrease in order to dehydrate the field and to dry the cotton plants, for instance. So, and it can be very specific. So a lot of places, a lot of countries have these protocols. So tomorrow, I tell you a little bit about the downsides of using protocols. I will say right now